Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Nihilistic channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full time thanks to your generous support, shares and views with multiple uploads every week to help share the rich history of monsters, locations and mythologies of D&D. Returning to the interdimensional hub of the multiverse, Sigil, the City of Doors, otherwise known as the Cage. The geography of this place perplexes many, as well it should, as it makes no sense. Floating above a spire of rock which begins as something like a mountain far below but just keeps on going up until it's more like a pillar of stone. There's actually quite a gap between the peak of the rock and the city, which is it's got its own relative gravity and generates most of its own atmosphere, water and such. Water, all provisions and materials arrive constantly via the countless planar portals the city contains and perpetually generates. While most Berks, which is people only really trust the liquids they purchase at taverns and such, the waters from across the multiverse find their way to the city. Even the dreaded flow of the river Styx, bubbling through certain parts of the city sewers and other less savoury locations. Today we are here to continue our talk about factions and some of those you may encounter when dealing with the more seedy parts of the city and its day-to-day operations. The Dead, or more formally the faction known as the Dustmen, believe that both life and death are false states of existence, and the true state, the state of true death, which can only be accomplished by denying one's emotions and physical wants and needs, can be found all over the city, but have a headquarters in the mortuary, where the fairly steady stream of corpses wind up, either to be buried, entombed, or cremated. Despite being kind of universally spat upon, the Dusties form one of the largest factions, which is seldom obvious unless extraordinary circumstances force them together to act together. You can find them all hours of the day at the Gathering Dust Bar across from the mortuary in the northeastern portion of the Hive Ward. I suppose I should talk about the structure and zones of the city, so you know what I'm talking about in regards to locations. Sigil is described as a donut with a city inside it. The streets curve slightly ever upward, and either because you're walking around the giant ring or because you're walking upwards towards the sides and the inside rim of the hub, which has a gap open to the thin atmosphere high above the concordant plane of the Outlands, or just the land as it's known. Though you can't really see it from Sigil very easily. In fact, you can't usually make out that the city stretches overhead with buildings, rooftops high above most of the time because the air is foggy and often quite polluted. Despite, depending where you are, it can be more polluted or less. You see, the air is this high is naturally very thin and cold, but the many thousands of portals in the cage constantly draw in atmosphere from across the multiverse, along with water, food, heat, and living beings. The combined effect of this is a chaotic form of internal weather, unpredictable odors, and the very occasional instance where an area becomes uncomfortably less suitable for your average mortal humanoid, either too hot, too cold, or too thin to get a decent breath. The locals just learn to deal with it, but the clueless tourists usually find themselves gasping for breath and panicking when all they really need to do is move somewhere a bit better. In the description text below the video, I'll be putting a link to the absolute best tool for navigating the city of Sigil, which is a map where all the main locations of note have been annotated and linked for you. Each of these locations is also paired with information on exactly where in the literature you can find the place described. I've also got a link to this on my community tab on YouTube, which I posted there a while ago, so you'll have to dig back through those posts because I post on the community tab fairly often. But certainly, if you have any intention of including Sigil in your games, this is an incredible resource, and kudos to whoever created it. The structure of Sigil is roughly divided up into wards. They appear to be clearly and evenly spaced, but it's not obvious when you're walking the actual cobbles themselves, as the streets and spaces of the city rarely move in a straight line, and the pictorial depiction is a condensed a hell of a lot. Keep in mind that what you're looking at there is a representation in 2 dimensions. The actual city curves around like the inside of a car tire. A blood or adventurer might just point a finger up and over the rooftops if asked directions, indicating a spot fairly clearly, but in a way that would make little sense if you then went and consulted some map. By the way, don't carry a map, or at least never openly consult a map in the city while you're there. It's as good as strapping a bag of chum to yourself and taking a dip in a river full of carnivorous quippers. Or at best, local cages will assume you're some sort of undercover hardhead honey peeler. I try not to include too much sigil slang, or cant as it's called, but for an extensive guide to its use. I'll also include a link down below in case you feel the need to look up something I've said during these videos. I really do encourage you to include the slang in your games for players who are new to the cage, as it really imparts the impression, as it rightfully should, that they are for a moment completely out of their depth and making their first foray into a much, much larger cosmic society. For instance, locals refer to the world of Toril as God's Walk. You'll also quickly discover that there's a fair amount of bigotry between the natives of the inner and outer planes. So the wards of the city, there's 6 of them. There's they are the ladies' ward, the market ward, the guild ward, the clerk's ward, the hive, and the lower ward. On paper, yes, they would just be 20 miles to walk if you were to travel on foot in a straight line around the inside of the city. On paper. It is around 1.5 miles from the edge of the hub to the other edge of the open hub, but the streets are curved, the buildings and streets are clustered and congested with traffic of all sorts. There are more ways to traverse the city than simply walking the cobbles, of course, but precious few are the portals that connect one part of the city to another. If you happen to discover one of those, you can get very rich very quickly. The street scene and feel of the city is a little bit Batman's Gotham City, a little bit Star Wars planet Coruscant. So because it is totally comprised of city, it is technically an ecumenopolis, completely reliant on imports for food and raw materials. Thus, the locals tend not to waste things, and they have a very dim view of any product that they consider to be likely to end up as junk. However, whatever is considered junk after it has been picked over by the entire social and economic strata is likely to be burnt, dissolved, or tossed into the ditch. The ditch is a stinking mire, a canal that marks the border between the lower ward and the hive ward. Favoured dumping ground for corpses, where even the Dustmen or corpse pickers are reluctant to go trawling. Back to the Dustman faction, we'll talk more about the wards later. The Dustmen believe that the inhabitants of the multiverse are already dead. Some are more dead than others, perhaps, but even the living are actually dead. They believe that this stage of the great multiversal cycle is in fact the lowest point. However, this is part of the natural way of things, and all must take place according to its time and its fate. So while they may be completely morose and morbid, the Dustmen are not murderous or suicidal. They believe that to die out of your turn in the dead book will see you reborn to live another miserable life. To this end, they assist the dead on their way, clean up the corpses found in sigil, and they do their best to not get emotionally attached or invested in anything, in order to truly let go and fully transition into a complete and total death. Clearly, these are not fun people to be around, and they are shunned by pretty much everybody, so they do tend to just slip under the radar of day-to-day bustle and hustle of the city of doors. It is a faction that calls to those who have suffered terrible loss in their lives. The Dustmen are organised in 5 circles. The 5th circle being the lowest rank, comprised mostly of initiates, and the 1st circle being the highest, including the ruling body of the faction. Their headquarters is the mortuary, which has a lot of portals to the cemeteries of other worlds. They are aligned with the Bleak Cabal and the Fated factions. They oppose the Sign of the One and the Society of Sensation factions, the Sensates. Most of the Dusties will never accept being raised or resurrected. The quest for true death, where there's no coming back in any form, obsesses them. However, they do tend to see the undead as somewhat superior, at least temporarily, because undead have attained purity. They have purged themselves of all passions and senses. This is not the case for all undead, though, so it is somewhat nuanced. But undead ignore Dustmen as long as they do no harm to the undead, which is very interesting. It's a universal sort of effect. Factotums are known as the initiates. You must be at least 4th level. Factotums are initiated through a dark pact with the undead. Factotums gain the power to command the undead. The lowest ranking factotums are initiates of the 5th circle. Mid-ranking factotums are in the 4th circle, factors and the factol being the 1st circle, but nobody knows what the 2nd and 3rd circles are. Many think they are full of powerful free-willed undead, and there is a lot of undead members of the Dustmen, so could be some truth to that. Just a reminder, if you've not subscribed or have been subscribed for a long time but not watched a video from me in a while, it may help to unsub and subscribe again. Make sure you click the notification bell and you should see regular uploads from me every week. Please do make a small effort if you're on a mobile device to thumb down to the like button and give me a thumbs up. Those who wish to explore the links in the description text under the video, you'll see links to my Patreon as well as the links that I mentioned in the video, and also to merchandise, patron blades, Teespring, that sort of thing. Subjects that you wish to me to cover, patrons get special consideration, but I'll take suggestions from anybody for subjects that you want me to cover. I take note of all this sort of stuff, and I usually respond to any of your feedback or questions. So if you have any questions about Sigil specifically, this is the video to ask in the comment section down below. And also anybody who is more knowledgeable in the subject than me, of which there are many, feel free to answer any questions in my stead. I am always appreciative of learning new lore from other people. Awesome. Okay, always. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll be back with more for you very soon.